Captain America is one of the most iconic heroes around, and therefore any change to his look is made with careful consideration. But then again, sometimes his looks have caught us completely off guard. I'm Adam Andrews with Top 10 Nerd, and this is the top 10 Captain America suits that we can't believe exist. Coming in at number 10 is Yeoman America. Back in Avengers Volume 3, number 2 in January of 1998, Morgan Le Fay's reality distortion wave caused the time period to be altered to a medieval setting, which also altered the Avengers' clothing, speech patterns, and thought processes. For Steve Rogers, he became Yeoman America, so he basically became like a knight-like soldier with stars and stripes armor, a sword, and a more fantasy-like shield. There's nothing particularly fancy about this armor, no crazy upgrade or anything, it's just so fun. So fun to see Avengers in different time periods, and as Morgan's new elite guard, the Queen's Vengeance, all these time-displaced Avengers look super cool and unique, but none caught me off guard like Captain America did. Number 9. Hydra Cap. While this version of Captain America did appear largely in the 616 reality, he is actually technically from an alternate timeline created by a Hydra brainwashed Cubic who used her reality warping powers to make Captain America his, quote, ideal self. The problem is, since Cubic was being influenced by Hydra at the time, she created a Captain America who grew up being made loyal to Hydra. That was her version of his ideal self. He is basically a sleeper agent in S.H.I.E.L.D. under the control of Hydra, who eventually spring their trap. This Cap would eventually supplant the real Captain America of 616 and would organize what was essentially another civil war, as well as Chitauri invasions of the Earth. He got promoted to director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and influenced the legislation of the S.H.I.E.L.D. Act, which gave S.H.I.E.L.D. way more authority. The story was fun for me, but it was this Captain America's armor that was the real star of the show. For the most part, Steve kept the red, white, and blue of his classic look, until further near the end of the story he started to wear this green and yellow supersuit of armor, created by Arnim Zola using the majority of the fragments of the Cosmic Cube mixed with Tony Stark's tech to create the Hydra Supreme suit, and it's tasty. Is that a weird thing to say? Number 8. American Civil War. In What If Captain America number 1, Captain America first actually appeared in 1863 as a member of the Union in the American Civil War. This version of the Cap didn't actually receive his enhancements from a super soldier serum like he does in the mainline continuity, because scientifically that makes no sense. Instead, after being mortally wounded by an encounter with an exceedingly evil and very racist version of Bucky Barnes, he is reborn by a version of Sam Wilson who was taken in by the Shawnee, who conjures an ancient eagle spirit that makes both Rogers and Bucky Barnes, quote, the same on the outside as they are on the inside. And you're right, that isn't any more scientifically possible, but it's fun. His suit that he wore was more Civil War era appropriate, wearing a coat, pants, and boots of the Union. However, his classic helmet was replaced by more of a headdress with a shield made of unknown bulletproof material. Now, this version of Captain America could actually summon a spirit eagle that would fight on his behalf. The uniform was supposed to represent unity of all peoples in America, which is what this Captain America fought for and what he normally stands for all the time, usually. Unless he's from the Ultimate Universe, because then he hates French people. Number 7. Secret Avengers. Now, what we have here is a much more subtle Captain America suit, but it is both my favorite and Chris Evans' favorite, the real Captain America, so I think it deserves to be here. When Steve Rogers became Commander Rogers of the Secret Avengers following the Superhuman Civil War, he adopted a new suit design. It's actually very similar to and was the inspiration for the MCU Captain America Winter Soldier suit. The suit itself is more subtle, like I said, featuring a dark blue color scheme with a simple silver star and like stripes design. It reflects the serious darker tone of both the Secret Avengers stories in the comics and of that MCU movie. In the movie though, it is referred to as the stealth suit and offers more maneuverability and a more Kevlar armor design. Most importantly, it's a suit that allows Steve to step out of the role of Captain America, always doing doing what is expected and instead act as himself, detached from his persona, and to make the tough calls. Number 6. Gladiator Cap. In the battle world, in Secret Wars, there are many lands that hold mystery and enchantment, but none as much or with as much savageness as Greenland. First appearing in Planet Hulk number 1, this version of Captain America is a fighter in the battle world Colosseum on the outskirts of Doomstat, and he fights alongside a giant red T-Rex named Devil. Yes, it's a version of Devil Dinosaur, which is as awesome as it sounds, and as it looks, because it looks awesome. That just right there is enough to sell me on this comic book, but this version of Cap wields a battle axe alongside a shield that I'm assuming is not vibranium, but it also takes a beating, so who knows. He also wears battle armor in true gladiator fashion, with long blonde hair and no helmet. He is sent by God Emperor Doom and Sheriff Strange to go into Greenland, which is basically inhabited by Hulks everywhere, with his mission being to eliminate the Red King. It's Gladiator Steve Rogers with a battle-bound T-Rex. You don't really have to ask any questions here, just go and check it out. Number 5. Sam Wilson MCU Captain America. At the end of the Falcon and Winter Soldier, fans were given the absolute treat of seeing Sam Wilson's debut as Captain America. Now, before wielding the shield, we all recognized Falcon as a hero by himself. However, his outfit here, which was ripped almost completely from his comic book counterpart, mixes his winged suit with a new and improved and armored Captain America suit, which had fans in a frenzy when it was revealed. In true MCU fashion, the new Captain America made one hell of a badass first appearance that left us salivating for more. From what we have seen of on-set photos though, it appears Marvel has changed Sam Wilson's suit somewhat going forward. I hope not too much though, because his new Captain America suit had such an impact. Did you like the suit? Let me know down below. Number 4. Peggy Carter. We all know who Peggy Carter is thanks to the MCU, and if you've seen the What If show, or now Multiverse of Madness, you know alternate versions of her get the Super Soldier Serum in place of Steve Rogers. Logically, this would make her a Captain Britain, which she is one of them as well, but a version of her appearing in Exiles number 3 in 2018 decided to become Captain America instead. And honestly, I like her Captain America costume a lot, and it was the inspiration for what her big screen counterparts don. I think there is a lot to this look that works really well, but I think above all of that, all it really took to achieve such an iconic look was very simply giving her a collared shirt and a tie underneath her armored and tactical looking Captain America suit. I don't know what it is about it. Maybe it's more spy and espionage vibes. It's subtle, but to me, it's perfect. Just saying. Number 3. Captain Avalon. We already looked at a medieval version of Captain America, yes, but if we shift focus to another reality, there is another. And just like Yeoman America, this one also changes the captain's name. In Avatar's Covenant of the Shield, Steve Rogers is now Stevan, or Saint Von, or Stevan. Look, if you don't want to struggle to say it, he also goes by Captain Avalon, which is way easier. Captain Avalon belongs to a group known as the Champions of the Realm. They're basically this world's version of the Avengers, and Avalon is their leader. Fun little fact for you, Captain Avalon recently made an appearance in the sequel to LEGO Marvel Superheroes, like the video game, but under a somewhat different context. In the actual comics, Stevan's son is stolen away by Dreadlord, who is essentially this world's Baron Zemo, and this prompts a reassembling of the Avengers, aka the Champions of the Realm. The interesting thing to note here is that this was actually set in Earth 616, just in a different planet created by the Living Tribunal and his fellow cosmic entities. But you know what's cooler than even that? This suit of armor. It's awesome. Number 2. Captain Colonies. Here's an interesting question for you. What would Captain America call himself if America never came to be? Well, funnily enough, in the great multitude of the universes in the Marvel landscape, there is indeed such a place and such a captain, who instead goes by Captain Colonies. Yes, it does feel kind of weird, but that's what this version of Steven Rogers becomes on Earth 4103. What sets him more apart though from the other Captain Americas is the fact that Captain Colonies is actually a member of the Captain Britain Corps, suggesting that this Captain America is an amalgamation of Brian Braddock, aka Captain Britain, and Steven Rogers. The problem is that he has only featured sporadically in the comics, having first appeared in 1991's Excalibur number 45. before, but so far he hasn't ever been the focus of any major story. His look isn't terribly different from Captain America's look really at all, it's just been Britishified. I think the idea of a Captain Colonies is where the unbelievability of this character comes from. There's no denying how strange a premise it actually is, and how in one version of the Marvel Universe, the Founding Fathers were just like, actually, nah, we're good. We don't need an America. Get out of here. Number 1, Soldier Supreme. There are so many Captain Americas out there that surprise us completely, but how about a Cap with the mystical and magical powers of the Sorcerer Supreme? Well, we get that in Infinity Warps when Gamora, wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, basically folds reality in half, merging characters with other characters. Now, one of the two merged together, in case you didn't catch on, is Captain America Steve Rogers and the Sorcerer Supreme Dr. Stephen Strange. The result would be Stephen with a PH, Rogers, the Soldier Supreme. He fought in World War II against the German Hell Priest Dormammu Red and would use his super enhancements and military training alongside his mystical and magical abilities. During World War II, he teamed up with his Howling Commandos of Hoggoth, including Dum Dum Fury and Bucky Wong. And later in the modern era though, after returning from banishment in the negative zone instead of being frozen, he would team up with Iron Hammer, Arachnite, and Weapon Hex to battle against Devondra. Yes, that's a lot of names, I'm sorry, but he's also very cool. Check him out. Number 10. Willing himself out of a cosmic cube. In Captain America issue 446 in 1968, the Red Skull has captured Captain America inside a cosmic cube, making Steve live in a fantasy where he saves Dr. Ernstein, Bucky never dies, and he gets to see his mother, giving him the goal of defeating the German stash. You know, the task he was created for. His whole dream inside the cube is created from his subconscious desires. It's much like a real dream, where some things just don't make much sense at all. The dream takes place during World War II, but some people have cell phones, and there are technologically advanced airships. That kind of thing. Eventually, Cap and Bucky Barnes make their way to the bunker that the German stash is supposedly in. But just as Steve is about to enter, his subconscious Bucky stops him. Bucky talks to Cap about how things here don't make much sense, how he's supposed to be dead, and how him saying all this is the Captain's subconscious just trying to break through. His subconscious tells him this is a dream. All of a sudden, Captain America is outside the cube and just outside the door to the Red Skull instead. Even the Red Skull is shocked that Captain America has the willpower to break out of a cosmic cube. Number 9. Smashed through multiple walls, beaten, and has a building dropped on his head. In Captain America Volume 4, number 31 and 32, Cap goes to visit his flame at the time, Rachel Layton, also known as Diamondback, who was working undercover for Red Skull. She turned on the Red Skull though because her love for Steve had grown and she couldn't kill him, which resulted in the Red Skull killing her. When Steve arrived, the Red Skull attacked in his superpowered suit. The fight involved Steve being thrown into and through multiple brick walls and through floors of an apartment building, being beaten rather ruthlessly by the Skull, and having the entire building demolished on top of him. Not to mention, this all happened after he had just found his lover dead. But Steve not only survived, he didn't break a single bone. He was able to get up and start fighting again. I mean, not very successfully, until the, surprise, not dead Rachel Layton intervened. Number 8. Used as a Cap missile by War Machine. Multiple times. In Secret Avengers number 10, the Secret Avengers have been distracted by a fake godlike entity in order for the mysterious group the Shadow Council, working with a group called the High Die, to kidnap Sharon Carter as a bargaining chip to trade for Shang-Chi, whose blood will allow the High Die to resurrect Shang-Chi's father, Zhang Zhu. But none of that matters. I just want to talk about when War Machine threw Captain America like a spear right into John Steele, another super soldier, slamming him into the ground in such a cool comic book image. Look at that! Captain America being Captain America just does a barrel roll out of it too. Completely unfazed. Number 7. Fighting Ultimate Hulk. In their first real battle against the Hulk, after he goes on a rampage through the city, the Ultimates try to bring down the big green guy. Giant Man and Iron Man both fail in their fights with Hulk, which is when Captain America enters the fray, dropping a whole tank on top of him. A tank that has Cap sitting inside of it. But this is the Hulk. And no puny tank dropped from hundreds of feet in the air is gonna stop him. Banner rips through the tank and engages Captain America directly. Or should I say that Cap
engages him, putting up a hell of a fight, punching him in the face, kicking him where the sun don't shine, and shield bashing Hulk all over, until Hulk starts to absolutely pummel him. Luckily, Thor comes in to take Hulk's attention away, but he lived. He survived. Number 6. Having the super soldier serum sucked out of him. In Captain America Volume 7, Issue 21, the villain Iron Nail had gained control of a giant helicarrier mech called Gungnir, which is honestly really cool looking, and was using it to attack and destroy the city of Neurovekistan. I'm so sorry if I messed that up. The captain had infiltrated the mech and was confronting Iron Nail inside. Now look, his name may be lame, but in their fight, he actually stabbed Captain America multiple times with tentacles that pulled the super soldier serum right out of his body. This caused Steve to be depowered, and on top of that, it rapidly aged the captain. Right as Steve was about to save the day, too. Just kidding! Cap won, throwing his shield into Gungnir's core, and with the help from Sam Wilson, the Falcon defeated Iron Nail and escaped the mech. Number 5. Gets his costume charged by Gambit, who explodes it. During the X-Men vs. Avengers event, one-shot comics were produced that pitted single Avengers versus single X-Men. While a lot of these were great stories, there was one that stood out as a surprise. That would be the AVX vs. Volume 1, Number 2, that pitted Spider-Man against Juggernaut and Steve Rogers against none other than Remy LeBeau Gambit. For those of you who don't know, Gambit has the unusual mutant ability to convert the potential energy stored in an object into kinetic energy. Basically, turning objects into bombs. Captain America is, well, Captain America though, and he gets a little cocky, not thinking much of the X-Men. After failing the obvious tactic of using Cap's shield as a kinetic bomb, Gambit surprises Cap, charging Steve's armor and catching Steve off guard with a huge explosion. But when the dust settles, Gambit did nothing but get Cap's full, undivided attention. Cap rushes Remy, using his shield to guard against Remy's charged playing cards, and takes him out with a swift uppercut. I'm still a huge fan of Gambit though, can't lie. Number 4, a backhand from Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet. During the iconic fight between the Avengers and the Mad Titan armed with the completed Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos easily beats almost all of the Avengers. Near the end of the fight, only Captain is left, and he calls Thanos out to battle him one-on-one. Cap's got some great lines here. As long as one man stands against you, Thanos, you will never be able to claim victory. A swing from the Mad Titan, and a dodge from Steve. But when hands sprout out of the ground, holding Steve in place, Thanos swings down on Cap's shield, yelling, "Then die you shall," and completely shatters the shield of Captain America. As he is about to land a killing blow on Steve, the Silver Surfer shows up in the nick of time and distracts Thanos, who, after getting a little punch from Cap, instead knocks Steve out cold with a quick backhand to the face. Not bad for an enhanced human against a mutant Eternal wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, who even the cosmic beings have trouble with. Unfortunately, us here at Top 10 Nerd, we don't have a super soldier serum. We gotta do this to survive. And it's because of you guys that we are able to do that. When you guys subscribe and like our videos, it lets YouTube know that we deserve to be here. Thank you guys for all your support. Alright, number 3. Thrown into an energy core and surviving. In Captain America number 38 in 1998, Captain America faces an adversary known as Protocide, a revived proto-super soldier. Protocide was given fake memories that back in World War II, Steve Rogers had killed him to remain the only American super soldier, which obviously isn't true. During a fight between the two, and a ton of Hydra agents, Cap saves Protocide from falling into an energy core. How does Protocide thank him? By throwing Steve into the energy core to kill him. Steve somehow survives using his shield as a platform to stand on while trying to think of a way out of the core. He quickly decides to sacrifice his own protection, subjecting himself to the full power of the core, to instead use his shield with the help of S.H.I.E.L.D., that's the acronym S.H.I.E.L.D., not the actual vibranium shield, to bust his way out of there with his clothes ripped to shreds and his body still intact. If that's the power of peak human conditioning, sign me up. Number 2. Zola virus. When Captain Rogers is teleported to the Zola dimension in Captain America Volume 7 in 2013, he is infected with a virus called the Zola virus, which puts him in constant pain and attempts to slowly take over his mind. While in Dimension Z, Steve gets his butt beat by Jet Zola, Arnim Zola's daughter, who counters his every move, almost breaking his back, and pushes him into a crowd of mutates who chew him up a bit. Then his ribs are broken and beaten by gamma-mutated cloned monstrosities of himself called Captain Zolandia. He gets blasted by Zola using his robotic body, and to top off the fight, he falls off of a cliff. Cap then just gets up, and using a knife, he cuts the Zola virus out of his chest. He cut a hole in his own chest and went on fighting. His mother did tell him getting back up was always the right thing to do though. Number 1, getting capped in the dome. Captain America has been shot so many times it makes 50 Cent jealous. Cap's been shot in the gut from a sniper, shot in the shoulder, shot in the leg multiple times and didn't even notice or care. But did you know that Steve Rogers has been capped in the dome? In Captain America and the Falcon issue 13 in 2011, Captain America takes a bullet to the dome that was meant for Sam Wilson. He was immediately rushed to hospital, and though he put up a fight, he was pronounced dead at 3:08 a.m. At the beginning of the next issue though, he suddenly wakes up, with the cause of his revival being placed on his, and I'm quoting this, unique metabolism. Captain America died for a grand total of 12 minutes that day, but he survived because of his metabolism. What?
We've seen a handful of times in the comics where Captain America was manipulated by the opposing side. Most recently in 2017's Captain America Steve Rogers and the following Secret Empire story event, Hydra had chosen Steve to manipulate as their sleeper agent, thanks to a hefty dose of brainwashing. Here's the kicker though, compared to other Avengers members, he's probably the most corrupted out of the group of heroes. By outside influences, that is. For example, this happens in Tales of Suspense issue 67 from 1965, when Red Skull recruits Steve by brainwashing him with the intent of having him assassinate the Allies' top military leader. It also happens in Captain America issue 234 from 1979. The hero is brainwashed and ends up beating up a bunch of protesters, carrying around a new version of his shield that has flames and a Nazi symbol painted on it. Luckily, Cap always returns to his normal self, but clearly he's an easy target for manipulation compared to the other members on the Avengers team. And at number 9, his racist past. Cap has a history that stretches back to the Golden Age, and a time where Marvel Comics had yet to exist. As we mentioned earlier, they were being published under their predecessor Timely Comics, who would later evolve into the entertainment giant. Steve has always been a man out of time though, from another era. An old-fashioned one at that, to put it nicely. So it shouldn't be much of a surprise to take a look into Cap's history and pick up on some pretty racist behavior. Aside from going after the Germans and the Japanese thanks to the World War II propaganda in comics, Steve hasn't been the most politically correct when it comes to tossing around slurs about Chinese people or Native Americans. Now to be fair, Steve is far from being a character who would discriminate like that in his contemporary appearances, and his racist behavior is thanks to writing at that time. But it's still a little hard to shake when you've really analyzed those past panels, not including the World War II stuff. That kind of makes sense. Although, because of propaganda, there's a lot of harsh opinions after the war about Germans who weren't Nazis and Japanese people who weren't war criminals. Just saying. And at number 8, he's judgmental. Being someone who constantly stands on high moral ground is not easy, and while it's respectable that Steve sticks to his code of honor, sometimes that makes him a bit judgmental towards other characters in both the comics and the MCU. For example, take that scene in Captain America Winter Soldier, the opening Black Ops mission. When Black Widow is acting out on orders acquiring information that wasn't part of the plan, or at least the plan that Steve knew about, he gets up on his high horse and criticizes her and Nick Fury for doing so, claiming that those ulterior motives could have compromised their mission. Now, he does have a point. Not knowing what Natasha's additional task was could have left them open for possible holes in their plans, but considering that Fury decided it was better to leave Rogers in the dark because he would, in fact, get up on that high horse, really does say a lot about how other characters viewed him at that time. And at number 7, that time he ditched America. Steve Rogers is a man who stands up for many positive ideals, but perhaps one of his most defining features is the ideal his superhero persona is named after, his patriotism and devotion to his country, the US of A. The irony is though, once upon a time, Captain America actually ditched America when he felt he was representing a country he no longer recognized or trusted. While that's become an interesting staple in Captain America's character dynamics over the years, and it's something that defines him from the likes of other highly ethical heroes, like Superman, this instant in the mid-70s made some think twice about Cap's love for the red, white, and blue. In Captain America issue 180 from 1974, Steve became Nomad after the Marvel Universe took on their own version of the Watergate scandal. He felt as if he was a man without a country. Eventually, he reassumes the Cap mantle after deciding deciding that he was a symbol of America ideals rather than its government. And at number 6, that time he tried drugs accidentally. During a story arc titled Streets of Poison that appeared in Captain America between issues 372 and 378, Cap became addicted to meth. The story begins when Cap is looking to help one of his tech employees with the meth addiction he acquired when trying to deal with the workload of stuff he had to do for the Avengers. Like, yikes, how bad is it at that compound? Anywho, Cap finds a rehab center for him and then decides to hunt down the drug dealers responsible. And when he confronts them at their meth lab, the place blows up. Cap inhales a lethal dose of meth in the process. Fueled by that meth, he goes on a bit of a rampage trying to blow up other meth labs, inhaling more meth in the process, and fighting his friends like Black Widow and Daredevil. Eventually he confesses to Hank Pym what has happened after having some serious hallucinations. And at number 5, Ultimate Cap. Let's talk about an alternate version of Steve Rogers, the one from the Ultimate Marvel Universe. Now for starters, the Ultimate Comics, aka Earth 1610, differ from Earth 616 by reimagining many of the heroes that we love, like Captain America, playing with different perspectives on the classic superhero icons. While Steve was very much still a man out of time, the character, rather than being his usual empathetic fight for the little guy and the innocent self, Steve's ideals and values were very much pulled from the considerably less progressive perspectives of the times he hailed from. He was basically an old white racist and misogynistic dude in the body of a ripped superhero. He's aggressively nationalistic to boot, and it was quite unsettling to think that under slightly different circumstances, this is the kind of man that Steve Rogers could have become in the main Marvel continuity had his origins been slightly altered. And at number 4, Bucky Barnes. Clearly, Bucky Barnes is one of Steve's biggest weaknesses. While we could get into the whole history behind Bucky's death and reappearance in the comics, a character who was once long believed to be one of the only characters to remain dead in the medium, perhaps the most prominent depiction of the Stucky relationship is in the MCU. It's a huge plot point for Cap, and his devotion and loyalty to his best friend, the one thing from the past that he still has, is a narrative that has significant impact and consequences in the MCU. Steve refuses to give up on Bucky, essentially starting Civil War. He's willing to die for Bucky. His devotion to Bucky, despite all the horrible things the Winter Soldier has done, ruins his friendship with Tony Stark. Yet despite all of that, despite all of the things that he would do for Bucky and put on the line, what we get from the two of them at the end of Avengers Endgame was baffling to most. Spoilers for Endgame. Heads up. Skip ahead 10 seconds if you do not want to hear this, okay? Good. In the end, Steve doesn't even have the proper closure with Bucky that we all wanted. And we're not talking about giving the Captain America mantle to Sam instead, we're just talking about closure in general. Dude would have died for his best pal, yet he can't even say goodbye? Come on, Steve. Spoilers out. And at number 3, he's killed. Every superhero who's originated in the Golden Age has at least once or twice caused the death of someone. While most of the heroes who fall into this category have been developed further over the years and have stuck to the code of not killing, Steve, once upon a time had his day as a murderer too. Now, to be fair, we're not counting the enemy forces he had to face during World War II. That was an unavoidable tragedy as per the time. Instead, we're talking about relatively non-threatening individuals and lowly criminals, specifically a group he encounters in Captain America Comics issue 3 from 1941, where Cap takes on Red Skull in order to save Bucky. Or at least that's the story on the cover. There's another story in that issue titled The Queer Case of the Murdering Butterfly and the Ancient Mummies. What a title. In which Steve takes out a henchman by the name of Lenny by impaling him with a dinosaur bone while shouting, "You asked for it, brother." It's not confirmed if he died, but based on where that bone landed, I think it's a pretty safe bet to guess that yes, he did in fact die. Butterfly, the criminal mentioned in the story's title, also dies in the issue, which we do see on panel when he gets hit by Cap's shield and his neck breaks. Both not a good way to go. In at number 2, Civil War. Whether you're looking at the comics or the MCU, it's no debate that Captain America is largely to blame for the events of Civil War, both the story event in the comics and the event in his third solo title film. Let's look at the comics though. Civil War's main premise follows the US government passing something called the Superhero Registration Act, in which it designates that superpowered individuals must act under official regulation. Cap opposes it, and those who support it, specifically Iron Man. Iron Man and his gang grow increasingly authoritarian throughout the storyline, and the whole thing explores the idea of freedom versus security. Now, as you know, Cap in the comics has had some major history with dealing with the US government and what it stands for, as we noted in our previous number concerning Nomad. But starting a whole super-powered civil war over the issue is one of the least responsible actions he's ever been a part of. It's reckless, and it also screws around with a lot of the other heroes in the process, like Spider-Man, whose life is left in shambles afterwards, his identity revealed, Aunt May almost killed in an assassination attempt on his life, and he gets sued by J. Jonah Jameson. Cap would eventually turn himself in and surrender at the end of the storyline, and is imprisoned because of it. And that brings us to our final point in at number 1, he's hypocritical. Despite his code of honor and the ideals of freedom that he fought for during Civil War, Cap has done some pretty hypocritical stuff over the years. After Civil War, we got to see that firsthand in Avengers vs. X-Men, in which Cap opposes the mutants when the Phoenix Force, the cosmic entity of rebirth and death, makes a return and finds a host in the form of Hope Summers, Hope being the daughter of X-Men leader Cyclops. Believing she's the mutant saver, the X-Men fight to keep her safe, whereas Cap and the Avengers believe her to be a major threat and want the X-Men to hand her over in order to keep the planet safe. He invades the X-Men sanctuary of Utopia in an attempt to forcibly remove Hope and take her away. It's not the only time that he's had beef with the mutants either. In Age of X, an alternate universe in which Charles Xavier never created the X-Men team, the government goes around hunting mutants, sterilizing them, assaulting them, and restricting their civil liberties, all of which Cap is an enforcer of. It's another example of just one thing being altered in a timeline that would have pushed Cap just a little too far in the wrong direction. 2. Hypnosis. The super soldier serum gives Cap immunity towards specific toxins and accelerates his metabolism, but it also gives him resistance to hypnosis, which is really cool, except for the fact that the resistance to hypnosis is kind of moot in a few ways when you're incredibly vulnerable to manipulation in the first place, and that is something that Cap definitely is. Now before you Cap fans get upset over this, it's true. Cap has on numerous occasions been incredibly susceptible and responsive to manipulation. He's been manipulated into doing things for Hydra and other foes on several occasions. Hell, a version of Steve was going around shouting "Hail Hydra" in 2017's Secret Empire after all, guys. I know it wasn't the real Steve Rogers or the 616 Steve Rogers, but come on. Look at how he was manipulated by Hydra when they covertly were running S.H.I.E.L.D. to secretly do their bidding in the MCU. Yeah, ultimately Rogers just wants to serve the greater good, but sometimes he can be naive about it. I mean, it's not totally a bad quality to have, to see the good in everybody and want to trust people. And at number 9, Cap Wolf. Captain America can become a werewolf, or at least he has become a werewolf in the past. He briefly had werewolf powers in 1992 during a 6-part story arc titled Man and Wolf in Captain America issue 402. In the woods outside of Massachusetts, X-Men member Wolverine finds a dead body, so he calls Cap in for assistance. While investigating, Steve ends up uncovering a town containing a bunch of lycanthropes, and of course, in the process, he himself is transformed into a werewolf. It's Cap Wolf, a vicious superhero with all the powers of Captain America and all the powers of a werewolf. Despite it not sticking, this wasn't the only time that a Captain America has become a werewolf. Sam Wilson would experience a similar situation years later while operating under the mantle. It's kind of fun. Moving on to number 8, his musical abilities. Okay, so this one is a little silly, and it's an almost ability, sort of. Back in 1985, we almost added Broadway musical star to the list of things that Captain America has done. Cap was meant to have his own musical with an estimated budget of $4 million. The concept actually sounds a little amazing. Also, this was outside of the comics, guys. The story would have followed Steve Rogers suffering through a midlife crisis, lulz, then running off on a mission to rescue his girlfriend from a terrorist who kidnapped her. As you can imagine, a lot of people thought it was a terrible idea. Needless to say, nothing came from this idea aside from a poster advertising it in comic books, looking for girls aged 10 to 14 for the cast to play what was described as Cap's special friend. Yikes. Keeping on that silly train, that brings us to our next number. In at 7, he can be a convincing Nazi. Cap has been a Nazi more than most heroes, and definitely more than any of his Avengers peers. That's kind of a skill, right? The ability to be a convincing Nazi? Yeah. Aside from Secret Empire in 2017, the whole thing was a different Steve Rogers, it's a long story. Cap has also raised his fascist flag in 1965 and in 1979. The former was in Tales of Suspense, issue 67, and the latter in Captain America, issue 234. Both times he snapped out of it though before the conclusion of the story. So, not a permanent Nazi, but Nazi for a day. Eugh. Still bad. Speaking of bad, in number 6, super racism. Captain America used to be quite racist back in the 40s, as in he literally used to go around shouting, I quote, "White America is a strong America." Wow. Now this is very much a product of the wartime comics, where comics were largely used as propaganda even before the US entered into the fray of World War II. Cap and other heroes, including DC's Superman and Batman, found themselves saying pretty terrible things and doing pretty terrible things with other races and cultures, including the Japanese and the Chinese, who were largely targets in pop culture media at that time. So why is this on a powers list? Because characters the likes of Captain America have great influence over their readers, especially considering he is such an important patriotic symbol. What he does in his panels matter. While this is obviously no longer the case, Cap is anything but racist these days, it is still a startling panel to see. Up next, number 5, the power of preach. It is undeniable that Captain America is a gifted orator. There's a reason why he's often in a leadership position. Dude is really good at motivating and inspiring people. It's kind of his whole shtick, considering his superhero persona. persona in the first place. Let's quickly count down some of the more inspirational speeches of his over the years. In the MCU, there's the whole Price of Freedom speech in Captain America the Winter Soldier. He gave a powerful speech when turning down the presidency in the comics in Captain America issue 250. He even finds himself filming PSAs for high schools about detention, as seen in the MCU Spider-Man film. And then there's the whole whatever it takes speech in Endgame. Hell, even the Ultimate Universe Cap can give a good speech, although a mildly rude and offensive one. He went on a tangent about how the A on his helmet didn't stand for France after he was advised to surrender. Regardless of what it is he's saying, Cap can command a room, and can compel almost anyone's attention with his gift of the gab. Moving on to number 4, super accuracy. Once upon a time in Captain America Comics issue 3, the third issue of his solo series that began in the 40s, Steve Rogers threw a sharp dinosaur bone at a foe and impaled him, murdering him. I mean, it was 1941, so a lot of stuff like this slipped under the radar prior to the Comics Code Authority. Ah, the golden age of comics. Anywho, the story takes place in a museum as Cap and Bucky attempt to stop 2 small-time robbers from thieving. The dude he kills is a guy named Lenny. He's a petty henchman who probably did not deserve to die, especially in that way. Regardless, that is some damn good accuracy, impaling the kid right through the heart with that bone. It's almost impressive if it wasn't so homicidal. Speaking of using objects to kill people, in at number 3, he can get homicidal with a shield. Steve Rogers has quite the bloody track record. Clearly. Aside from using dinosaur bones to impale lowly criminals, he's also used his shield to murder people too. So wholesome. I mean, it is kind of impressive though, isn't it? I mean, sure, it's made of vibranium, but using an object like that effectively to commit homicide is definitely a skill. Right? Right. Anyway, Cap used his shield to help out superhero Union Jack when Jack's brother, Baron Blood, a vampire if the name didn't give it away, went on a rampage. Cap found himself having to permanently take care of the problem by decapitating him with his shield as Union Jack looked on, and as Baron Blood clawed at his chest too, to boot. Moving on to number 2, the Battle Van. You've heard of the Batmobile, the Quinjet, the Hell Cycle. You name it. But have you heard of the Battle Van? Aside from having a bit of a lackluster name, the Battle Van is more commonly known as Captain America's van, which isn't much better, is it? A product of the 80s, this rad custom-built van, a Chevy nonetheless, was a nondescript vehicle designed by Wakandans for Cap. I mean, I get it, it's really good when you're trying to be low-key, but it kinda looks like he just stole the Mystery Machine from Scooby-Doo and then spray painted it one color to avoid getting caught. Those dang kids. The van can actually change colors, might I add, but whatever. It can basically function as a base on the go for Cap. It has a mount for his motorcycle at the back because, you know, one vehicle wasn't enough, and even has a little cot if he feels like nap time. Oh. It is worth noting that an alternate reality version of Cap from Earth 600043 actually uses this van religiously, which is pretty great. And finally, in at number 1, he cannot get drunk. Because of Cap's incredibly fast metabolism, thanks to the Super Soldier Serum, he has an immunity to a lot of things. The serum prevents the buildup of fatigue poisons in his muscles, his body is resistant to gases and hypnosis like we mentioned, and he has an immunity to alcohol, meaning he can never get drunk. Often his resistance to alcohol is played up as a joke in the comics or his cinematic appearances, but in a way, that kinda sucks, doesn't it? I mean, not saying that you need to get drunk at a party to have fun, but having the option to choose would be nice at least. He's not the only superhero who suffers from this ailment either. Deadpool has a similar problem thanks to his boosted regenerative healing factor.
Kicking off the list at number 10, smacked by Thanos. We got to see Captain America and many others get the beatdown of their lives in Avengers Infinity War, but in the comic, in Infinity Gauntlet, it was somehow even more brutal. Yet in part 4 of Jim Starlin's The Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos at one point weakens himself while maintaining the stones because he wanted to take on the Avengers in a more equal fight. All of this just to impress Death. So he makes himself weak and then fistfights them. It's crazy. So Captain America is leading the Avengers into battle, and at this point, everybody is getting hit. Cyclops gets his head stuck in a clear block of force, Vision gets his insides just torn out, and then Thanos sees Cap as having such an emotional outburst, and then after Thanos destroys Cap's shield, he gives him the mighty backhand of a lifetime, knocking him out cold. And before we continue on to number 9, guys, if you could just go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, because it really goes a long way for us here at the studio. You guys are the best, thank you so much. Now back to the video. Number 9, he lost Bucky. Okay, 2005 was a wild time. We got to see Jason Todd return as the Red Hood, and Marvel had their own type of super sleeper assassin come back from the dead as well, Bucky Barnes. In 2005, Bucky Barnes returned, but of course he was never the same. Near the end of World War II, Bucky and Cap were trying to disarm a bomb on a plane while taking down Baron Zemo. The bomb went off, hurling Steve and Bucky into the freezing waters, and well, as for Cap, he came out of this pretty good. He He remained frozen, just hanging out, and Bucky, he didn't end up so lucky. His body fell into the freezing waters, and at the time, a Soviet spy submarine was in the area crossing the English Channel. So they scooped him up, fixed the whole left arm situation, brainwashed him, and turned him into this brutal assassin. It's heartbreaking. See, he has all these incredible abilities that make him a fierce warrior, but he doesn't remember how he got them, making him this deadly assassin and a super crazy villain to handle. This is Steve's right-hand man. Every conflict that they go through is just painful. One of the biggest turning points of Marvel was the introduction of the Winter Soldier. This was a conflict that came to life on the big screen back in 2014 with the Winter Soldier, and we're kind of still seeing Bucky try and figure this life out. With the Falcon and the Winter Soldier coming next month on Disney Plus, we can see even more of what he has to go through post-Winter Soldier times. Number 8, Hail Hydra. This next one resulted in writer Nick Spencer getting death threats. That's right, so fans were mostly not okay with this one. Back in 2016, Captain America said 2 words that would throw every comic book fan for a loop: Hail Hydra. It all went down in 2017's Secret Wars, when Captain America's reality had been rewritten secretly by Kobik, who was a sentient cosmic cube acting under the influence of the Red Skull. So as a child, Steve was recruited and raised to believe in their ideology, which was the strong ruling for the weak, for the good of all. Now there's a pleasant nod to this in Avengers Endgame, of course, when the team goes back in time to the first Avengers plot. We see Steve get in the elevator to try and get the scepter, and then we see the whole Hydra/Shield elevator stocked full of guys. Now we don't know this at the time, but that's fully Hydra. But Steve knows this. So instead of beating everybody up and kicking ass in the elevator like he did in Winter Soldier, he just said, "Hail Hydra." And then just like that, he walked out of the elevator with a smirk on his face. It was beautiful. Number 7, Old Man Cap. At the end of Avengers Endgame, now that we're talking about it, we see Captain America return the Infinity Stones. Only he doesn't shoot back to the present day after he's done. No, he sticks around, hangs out with Peggy, dances the night away, and then we see him as an old man giving the shield down to Sam Wilson just minutes later. It's a lovely end to Chris Evans' run on the character. You got a lot of feels. But in the comics, we also saw an old Captain America, but this time, it wasn't on his terms. The Iron Nail sucked all of Cap's serum out, leaving him not ripped, but also not young as well. So now Steve looked 90, and there's no way you're gonna fight at that age, let alone pick up a shield. So he would lead the Avengers and call out orders from the radio. It sounds like a pretty sweet job for us, but for Steve, he's probably like, man, this is the most boring job I've had in my entire life. Number 6. William Naslund. He was originally introduced in the comics as the Spirit of 76 in Invaders issue 14. William Asland also held Captain America's mantle for a brief moment. This what-if comic turned out to be canon, so back after the apparent death of Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes at the end of World War II, the United States approached him to be the new Captain America. The first replacement. Wow, how exciting would that be? So much pressure though. So he had the shield for a brief amount of time. He had done a couple of missions, and then he died in action. Yeah, he had to fight off these robots, and he ended up in the hands of one of them and was crushed to death. But he went down a hero. He activated a flare device that made the robot inactive, and he also summoned the other members of the All Winners to come to the rescue. So he went out a hero. Short but sweet. Number 5. William Burnside. William Burnside, who had changed his name to Steve Rogers and even got work done on his face to match the look. He ended up developing another Captain America serum, and he and his buddy Jack tried to be the new Bucky and Cap. So they got enhanced abilities and they took down Red Skull. They did some pretty good work as a team. The only thing was, a year later, things started to go a little bit south. They started to become paranoid schizophrenics, so the government put them in cryogenic suspension. He went from being Captain America to being the villain, just like that. So William and his Bucky Barnes sidekick, Jack Monroe, both were in custody of Dr. Faustus, who brainwashed William to become the Grand Director, the leader of the hate group called the National Force. Number 4. 404. Cap not found. In Captain America issue 404, we see Steve Rogers squaring up against werewolves. Yeah, what a sight to see. You heard me correctly. I said werewolves. The story known as Children of the Night runs from issue 403 to 405. And during this time, Captain America is fighting off Starksboro werewolves, and then when Nightshade tries to inject Wolverine with her wolf serum, his healing factor keeps counteracting it. So Druid mesmerized him with serums too. Then the next issue, we see front and center Cap Wolf. Pretty hard to forget. So now he's a werewolf and he has faint memories of Steve Rogers. So, of course, as you would expect, it's a pretty messy good time. Number 3, Civil War. Captain America Civil War was released in 2016, directed by the Russo brothers, and the whole movie, like the comic, is superhero politics. If you're a superhero, you have to register. You can't just be out filming yourself doing super TikToks and then you end up accidentally exploding a school. It's just not gonna fly anymore. And in the movie, it's Wanda Maximoff who kickstarts the Sokovia Accords, forcing Tony to side with the government as he feels responsible for Charles Spencer, among many others, deaths. You know, with all the events that unfolded with the Age of Ultron stuff. So Steve wants to protect Bucky this whole time, and of course, freedom throughout the team is encouraged. Now, eventually, due to Baron Zemo's work, he gets Tony in the same room as Steve, and we see footage of a brainwashed Bucky kill Tony's parents. The next 10 minutes are filled with Steve having to fight off Tony in order to save his best friend. And it's truly heartbreaking, and it all ends with Steve sticking the shield in Tony's chest, and as he carries away a broken down Winter Soldier, Tony says to him the shield does not belong to him, it belongs to his father. And that's the last time he sees the shield and Tony Stark, so it all goes downhill for Cap for quite a while after this point. Number 2, stuck in Dimension Z. In the comic storyline Castaway in Dimension Z, Captain America ends up getting stuck in this land created by Arnim Zola, and he's in there for 12 years. That's some Black Mirror type torture. That's like crazy. So during the 12 years, Steve raised a boy named Ian, who's a kid he rescued from Zola as his own. So the whole thing is that Steve has to return to Earth soon before this implant on his torso that's combined with the virus of Zola's consciousness takes over his mind. Not a great scenario. Also, ouch, that doesn't look too comfortable of a procedure. It's one of the more brutal body injuries, and of course the whole being trapped for 12 years element, I mean, that just adds to this already horrible nightmare. And finally, number 1, shot by Sharon Carter. We go back now to the Civil War comic book event where Captain America was killed by his girlfriend Sharon Carter. Yeah, so after Crossbones sniped him, Agent 13, who at the time was Cap's girlfriend, delivered the final bullet from a much closer range. Well, it turns out it wasn't Sharon who was doing the work, really. The classic brainwashing made this defeat happen. Dr. Faustus. Okay, this causes a whole chain of events. I mean, for starters, Bucky decides he should then kill Iron Man after this, blaming him for the death of Steve Rogers. And then also Falcon ends up going after his own lead, he just leaves. And now Tony ended up showing Bucky the letter Cap wrote about how he should be the next Captain America. And Bucky agrees to take the spot only if he can operate solo. No government, no big brother watching, just let me do my job, move out of the way, you guys suck. To think all this came to a climax after Steve's girlfriend was the one to deliver that final blow just adds insult to injury. Well guys, there you have it. Which one of these Captain America moments are your favorites, are your least favorites? Did you enjoy the Hail Hydra part in the comics? Did you enjoy it in the movie? Let us know all your thoughts down below because we love checking them out. As always, we'll see you in the next video. I'm Taylor McWaters. Keep washing those hands, keep reading those comics. We're getting there, we're doing our thing. You guys are the best. See ya.